Hello everyone, back tuning into Solar Sunday. So this is our second Solar Sunday of the year. Our first Solar Sunday was back in February. We only do 2 or 3 a year. So probably do the last one of this year in August, because after that we're off and running into the winter update. So it's quite an exciting day, quite an interesting day when we do Solar Sunday at Gazovitz. We're going to have a look at everything that's happened with the current solar cycle, number 24. All the charts have been updated by our good friend James Ackwill. Big thank you to James for updating all the tracker charts for us. We've been Googling away, trying to find some information for you for solar cycle 25, but actually and unfortunately no new information has become available yet. So we're just waiting now for the official forecast from agencies such as NASA to turn up for solar cycle 25. They're very, very late now in appearing. I'm not sure what the delay is in getting these forecasts out for solar cycle 25. We keep looking, keep waiting. So far nothing doing, but it won't be long, I wouldn't have thought, before we do get some forecasts for solar cycle 25. So we won't have much information on that, but we will have plenty of information for what's going on with solar cycle 24. I'll talk you through all the tracker charts in a second. Just to say, later on at Gazovitz, we'll have a Gazovitz Sunday roundup. We'll have a look at weather next week to 10 days. That's going to be a bit truncated, of course, because we're already doing the solar stuff for Solar Sunday. So, be a little bit shorter, Gazovitz roundup, than usual. But we will have a look at weather next week to 10 days. Also, we're going to do the next update for the Bank Holiday weekend. Of course, that's only a week away now. So, we'll have the update Bank Holiday weekend for you later on this afternoon. And also this afternoon, if you're interested in Glastonbury, the Glastonbury Festival, we'll have our second written report for that. So a lot going on at the website today. It's certainly going to be keeping me on my toes to get all of that done. And of course, Solar Sunday will be placing this video on the solar updates page, so it's like 24, 25 updates page later on with a written report. So I'm going to have loads to be doing today. Not sure where I'm going to have time to fit it all in, really. So I better get on with Solar Sunday. I'm going to start off with the solar disk on our side of this today from solarham.net, and solar activity is officially at very low levels today. We've got a couple of sunspots, a signal just there and just there, but overall there's not a great deal doing really on the solar disk. Solar activity is at very low levels. This is the Gazovitz Spring Season Daily Solar Activity Tracker. It's been updated to yesterday, 20th of May, by our good friend James Ackwill. And all the charts that you see in this video have been updated by James Ackwill. So big thank you to James for keeping these updated for us. So this is where we currently stand with sunspots, just here. Now last week when I did the Gazovitz Sunday roundup, we looked at the tracker, we was actually having several days of spotlessness on the sun. We had several days of no sunspots. Then we had a very small increase in activity just around here, and that's where we are right now. We have got 1 or 2 sunspots, but overall solar activity, as I say, is at very low levels. The trend lines have stopped dropping for the time being, so you'll remember that we had this big push up in solar activity just there, right at the beginning of April, and then it crashed down, but it was enough to lift the trend lines, which are indicated by the thick green and the thick red lines. It was enough to lift both of those upwards. Recent couple of weeks we've seen the trends moving downwards again, but we are bottoming out with that now. We're beginning to flatline a little bit with these trend lines. Of course, within the next few weeks and months, these trend lines will move down further, but right now we are seeing a little bit of a flatlining of the trends. But you can see quite clearly the trend from last year is down. This is where the trend lines were back in the summer and early autumn of 2016. Last year it was up here. Now the trend lines are down here. So obviously, yes, we have seen a drop downwards in the trends, and that's what you'd expect because we are moving down into solar minimum of solar cycle 24. Actually, this shows up the solar cycle very nicely. This is updated up to last month, and it covers the full solar cycle from the beginning back in 2008 to where we are right now, which is just there. So you can see that we did get a very, very slow and gradual lift up in sunspots in solar activity until we reached our first peak, our first maximum of solar cycle 24, which is just here, and occurred at the end of 2011. Then through 2012 and into 2013, we had a drop in activity, quite interestingly, and then a second peak occurred, and that was the actual solar maximum of solar cycle 24 that happened just there at the beginning of 2014. Unusually, the second peak, I've explained this in other videos, but I have to assume people watching for the first time. So, unusually, the second peak, this one just here, was above and greater than the first peak, this one just here. Normally, in a typical solar cycle, the first maximum is the maximum of the solar cycle. That's normally the one that is actual solar maximum. You do very often get a second peak, but it doesn't normally reach the level of the first peak. So this solar cycle has been very unusual all the way along. It's been very unusual with the way we came out of solar minimum, very prolonged and protracted solar minimum, solar cycle 23, 24, this period just here. Such a slow increase in activity then to get to that first peak just there, and then the drop off, of course, through 2012, 2013, that's quite unusual, and then, of course, the second peak turning out to be more extensive than the first peak. So all the way along, solar cycle 24 has been a very unusual solar cycle. Now, since the maximum that occurred at solar 2014, of course, we have been dropping down towards solar minimum. So this is where we are right now. And you can quite clearly see it's not going to be long before we get this trend line, which is the thick orange line or brown line. Not going to be long before we get it back to that sort of level. You see what happens in the solar minimum from over there. So at some point in the next 18 months to a couple of years, we're going to find this trend line moving down into the solar minimum, solar cycle 24, and then we'll move on into the next solar cycle, number 25. And it doesn't happen in a linear process, you'll notice. So, for example, we have the maximum just there, and then we dropped there. Then we got a peak, went up to there, and then we dropped again, and then we peaked again, and then we dropped again, and then we peaked again. And you see the way this works. The trend is down, but it isn't a linear process, and you do get these various peaks and troughs occurring along the way, whilst all the time, of course, activity is declining. So actually in April 2017, last month, we did get a little bit of an increase in activity, and that lifted the trend and the orange spot, or the brown spot, that lifted it just a little bit upwards compared to where it was in March. At some point, we're going to go down into that sort of level. We'll go under this line just here, where we are right now compared to where it was at the start of the solar cycle, which we're around here. So that takes us to around that sort of level just there, which is the kind of level we was at in 2010. But before much longer, we'll be going down into 2000 and sort of 2007, 2008, 2009 type levels, which is this sort of level just here. It won't be long at all now before that happens. I would suspect by the end of the year we'll be seeing the sunspot numbers in this sort of zone just here, which will take us back to where it was right at the beginning of the solar cycle. Comparing this solar cycle to the last one, 23, 24, you can see how much weaker it was, or how much weaker it has been. So this is solar cycle number 23. This is the last solar cycle running from 1996 to 2008. Again, you see we had the double peak. The first peak was greater than the second peak. The first peak of solar cycle 23 occurred in the year 2000, the second peak occurred at the beginning of 2002. And then since then, of course, we had the crash in solar activity in the second part, or at the end of solar cycle 23, that takes us to this extremely long, slow and protracted solar minimum that really started in 2006-7 and didn't end until 2008-9. So it was a long solar minimum, long period of very slight sunspot activity. Then the gradual lift upwards for solar cycle 24, but look how much weaker solar cycle 24 was compared to solar cycle 25. And then of course that's where we are right now, just there. So going back to the last solar cycle, the last time we was at this sort of level, coming out of solar maximum and going into solar minimum, I suppose it was around this period just here, 2004, 2005. So that's kind of where we are as we move down into solar minimum, around where we was in 2004-5. But remember that period, 2004-5, was coming off a very big solar maximum, whereas this period is coming off a much weaker solar maximum. So you can't really compare the two situations. This is how radio flux is progressing. Solar flux, again, we've got solar cycles 23 and 24 compared here. So again, the maximum of solar cycle 23 occurs just here. And notice, interestingly, solar flux, radio flux, the second maximum was greater than the first maximum in solar cycle 23. Then, of course, we're declining downwards. This is where we are for solar cycle 24. The first maximum there, the second maximum there, and then the decline down. So these always mirror one another. The sunspots and the solar flux will always sort of mimic one another in the way they go into solar maximum and back to solar minimum, albeit they aren't linear, so you do get various disturbances along the way, but the trend is usually the same when it comes to sunspots and to flux. Now, if you've been watching the Solar Sunday updates, also if you've been watching the winter updates, you'll know that Solar Cycle 24, quite interesting, the way that it has mirrored an old solar cycle that occurred in the 1800s, solar cycle number 12. All the way along, these two solar cycles appear to have been mirroring one another quite well. Solar cycle number 12 ran from the year 1877 through to 1890, and of course we haven't yet finished solar cycle 24, so we can't say when that is going to end, but it'll probably be sometime around 2019, so it'll run from 2008 2019. Possibly, if it's a protracted solar minimum, it might go into 2020, but I would suspect this solar cycle will end in 2019. Now, on this chart, the solar cycle 12 is indicated by the thick green line, and 24 is indicated by the thick brown line, or the thick red line, or the thick orange line. So you can see the way that these two solar cycles have occurred with one another. So we begin here at solar minimum for both these solar cycles, and then the way that they went up into their maximums is very much along the same line. So it was a slow movement for both of these solar cycles into their first maximum, which of course is happening just here for both these solar cycles. Then you notice they both decline a little bit from that first maximum, and then we get the second peak of both the solar cycles looking very similar again. And interestingly, it is quite unusual for the second peak to be greater than the first peak in terms of solar maximum, but both of these solar cycles did that. Their second peaks were the actual maximums of these solar cycles. And then as we move down into solar minimum, you can see that again very much along the same lines, moving down into or moving out of solar maximum, heading towards solar minimum in a very similar way, with peaks and troughs along the way. Now, you're always going to get peaks and troughs as you move out of solar maximum into solar minimum, but the way they've done it is quite similar. And this is where we are right now in terms of solar cycle number 24, our current solar cycle, we're just there, and that compares to solar cycle 12, and really they are very much on a par with one another once again for this period of the solar cycle. You notice that just on from where we are, solar cycle number 12 had a crash in sunspot numbers, very early month of no sunspots at all. And then they get more frequent, of course, as you go along here into the actual solar minimum. So it'll be interesting to see whether we do get a crash in the next few months. That's where we are right now, actually. So far, we haven't had a real crash in sunspot numbers. It may not be too much longer. If we continue to be along the lines of solar cycle 12, it may not be too much longer before we get a crash over a monthly period for solar cycle number 24. Overall, I think solar cycle 24 has been weaker than number 12. Interestingly, you notice that through most of this chart, the green trend line is trending above the orange or the red trend line. So pretty much all the way along, really, solar cycle 24, the current solar cycle, has been weaker than number 12, albeit they have been mirroring one another quite well. This is all solar cycles, and this really does put into perspective how weak the current solar cycle has been compared to all those past solar cycles. So this takes us right the way back to number 1, which is up here, and number 24, the current solar cycle, which is down here, number 24 indicated by the red line, of course. So just look how active most of these solar cycles are. Most of the solar maximums of these solar cycles are occurring up here. The weaker solar cycles are these ones down here. And you can see that 24, the current solar cycle, has very, very much been on the weaker side of these solar cycles, very much in the pack with those weaker numbers, such as solar cycle number 5, number 6, and of course number 12 as well. So it has been an unusual solar cycle all the way along. It has been, as we know, a very, very weak solar cycle, particularly in comparison to many of the past solar cycles. These are the weak solar cycles. James has updated this for us. So this is showing solar cycle 24 indicated by the red line, juxtaposed to the weakest solar cycles. So we've got number 5, number 6, they're the Dalton minimum solar cycles, of course, 5 and 6. We've got solar cycle 12, solar cycle 14, and solar cycle 16. So not the weakest of the weak in terms of the weakest solar cycles. Those two solar cycles, the weakest, are actually number 5 and number 6, these just here. So not the weakest, but amongst the weakest, definitely. If we see the red line is up here, on a par, really, with, again, solar cycle number 12, the pink line, and also on a par with number 14, which is the green line. Number 16, this blue line up here, was significantly, well, not significantly, but it was rather more active compared to those solar cycles. So 24 hasn't been the weakest of the weak solar cycles. Those two remain, number 5 and number 6, the two Dalton minimum solar cycles, but it has been most definitely amongst some of the weakest solar cycles that we've ever seen. That's where we are now in comparison to those weak solar cycles, and you can see that, well, the red line looks like it's pretty much at the bottom of the pack now. So actually, we're probably underneath all of these very weak solar cycles at the moment in terms of sunspot activity, albeit there's a great deal in it. You notice that within the next few months we can expect to take number 24 down into that sort of level, and that of course is where we're going into solar minimum. Now this chart is quite interesting. James has updated this for the first time quite a long while, I think. This is the 11-year smoothed average of mean monthly international sunspot numbers. What's interesting about this is that you'll notice just how dramatic this drop in solar activity from cycle 23 to 24 has been. So this is where we are right now in terms of smoothed sunspot numbers over the month. We're just there. But what is really interesting is the big fall that has occurred from solar cycle 23, which is, of course, is back here. The drop that has occurred, and we haven't come out of that at all yet, really. We've kind of flatlined, we aren't dropping anymore. but the drop in sunspot numbers has been really quite dramatic, and the drop is probably on a par, well, not quite on a par, but it's probably the most dramatic fall in solar activity, in sunspot activity, that we've seen all the way back to this period just here. So this is taking us back into the 1700s, and that's going back towards the Little Ice Age, of course. So you see there was a very, very dramatic drop in sunspot numbers over monthly periods in the 1700s into the start of the 1800s. That's the Dalton minimum. That's solar cycles 5 and 6, of course, the very weakest of the solar cycles, which bottoms out around there. So you'll notice there's quite an interesting trend that happens when we get these big drops in solar activity. We get the drop, which happens just there, and then we kind of flatline things off for a solar cycle, maybe even drop a little bit more, and then lift things back up. And then we stabilise, and then we drop again, and then we stabilise about low level, then we lift things up. You'll notice that through most of the 20th century, what happened actually, particularly the first half of the 20th century, is that these sunspot numbers were moving up as each cycle went along. So we had a prolonged period through the first half of the 20th century of increasing solar activity. Then we get a drop, stabilise a bit, then lift things up, and then a drop. So I think what's going to happen for solar cycle 25, if you follow the pattern, is that we won't go back to this sort of level for solar cycle 25. I suspect either we'll stay around very close to where we are right now for solar cycle 24. It's possible we might drop things a little bit more. Actually, that's what happened with 5 and 6. I don't think we'll go down to the level of 5 and 6, but it's possible that solar cycle 25 might even be a little bit weaker compared to solar cycle 24. If not, I think it'll be very much along the same lines of solar cycle 24. And then we get to solar cycle 26, which is going a very long way away. I'll be quite an old man, I think, by the time we get to solar cycle 26. But by the time we get to solar cycle 26, I would suspect then we'll probably have a solar cycle that's beginning to lift things back up again, beginning to move back up, maybe not getting to that sort of level even for solar cycle 26, but certainly beginning to recover from the crash of number 24 and the probable sort of flatlining or maybe even declining a little bit more of solar cycle 25. That's all rather speculative, of course. And what I just end with this, talking about solar cycle 25. So this was updated. We talked about this in the last update. Back at the end of last year, we did actually get our very, very first sunspot for solar cycle number 25. And it was this one just here. Now, I'm not sure how they calculate, but this is a sunspot of solar cycle 25. But that is that's the official line, that this is the first sunspot. It was the first sunspot of solar cycle 25 that occurred there on, I think it's the 19th of December 2016. So even before we've reached the solar minimum of solar cycle 24, already solar cycle 25 is starting to limber up. And of course, what's going to happen is that all of these sunspots for number 24 will just disappear. They'll fade away. The solar cycle will die. Then very little will happen for a prolonged period, and then we'll start seeing increasing number of sunspots appearing for number 25. And when that really starts happening, that's when we'll have left the true minimum of solar cycle 24 and started again with solar cycle 25. Right, I hope you found the video interesting. We've covered everything that's happened up to this point, up to May 2017. Next Solar Sunday will be in August. That will be our final Solar Sunday of the year, because after that we're off and running into winter updates. So we cover all of this solar stuff for the winter updates anyway, so there'll be no point doing Solar Sunday after August. So our third and final Solar Sunday of 2017 will be at some point during August. Maybe by then we'll have some official forecasts from the likes of NASA for Solar Cycle 25. Keep your fingers crossed that we might do. Right, later on today, we're going to do the Gaz Weather's Sunday round. That'll be a little bit truncated compared to normal. I won't cram as much in, but we will look at weather for the next week to 10 days. Also, I've got the next Bank Holiday Weekend update coming up as well this afternoon. And, of course, that written report for Glasgow goers. So if you're interested in Glastonbury, come back for the second written report. Next Sunday, really interesting day, because we're going to be releasing the GazWeathers.com summer forecast and a little sneak peek, as the bandwagon rolls on, a little sneak peek for autumn next Sunday as well. So come back for all of that next week. And of course, we've got all the updates for today and over the next few days as well. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.